Dr. Chopra's popularity as an international presenter and keynote speaker is exemplified in the long and impressive list of awards and honors bestowed upon him. Many studies have been made or are being made in the field of psychophysical domain of consciousness. Dr. Deepak Chopra's contributions are also in establishing a bridge between spiritual and psychophysical aspects of consciousness. Dr. Deepak Chopra.
Thank you very much, and I first of all should say how grateful I am to be here with all Dayal Baghis, and very grateful for having the honor to present today, especially the fact that I've admired Professor Satsangi Ji Sahab for a long time, so thank you for having me. It's billed as a workshop, so I think I'm going to try and accomplish two things. First, a theoretical framework for a science of consciousness, and then in the last part, hopefully an experiential exercise to give you a little bit of insight on the theoretical framework that I present. So, about a month ago, I was actually on a book tour on a fiction book which is called God. The title is God, A Story of Revelation, and it tracks how people have thought about the mystery of their existence since the time of Job in the Old Testament, and then on through St. Paul and finally Einstein and Tagore. So it's a journey in human thought. That's why I was very interested in Margaret, your talk, which spoke about meaning, how meaning is different in different cultures, different experiences, and how the whole idea of a cross-cultural hermeneutic dialogue is so important. In any case, I will quote at some point Tagore and Einstein's conversation on the nature of reality, but I was also speaking to you in German. There are more than one word for reality, and that in itself creates different cognitive and perceptual experiences, I would say, of reality. So I was on this tour, and I was picked up in Los Angeles by my son and my 4.5-year-old grandson, whose name is Krishan, named after my father. My son's name is Gautam. So two very well-known Indian names. And as we get out of the airport, my grandson Krishan, he looks at me and he says, "What is dark energy?" 4.5 years old. I said, what do you know about dark energy? And he said, it flows through the night sky. I said, that's pretty good poetic description. I said, what else do you know about dark energy? He said, it's 70% of the universe. That's pretty good for a 4.5-year-old. So I'm still puzzling over how would he even ask these questions. We drive out of the airport and we're driving by Santa Monica, and I roll down the window, and in Santa Monica there's this huge view of the ocean. So he looks at me and he says, "How did they make the ocean?" I said, who make the ocean? He said, "They." I said, "No, I can't answer the question till you ask me properly. Who do you mean by they? How did they make the ocean?" So he thinks for a bit, then he reframes the question. He said, "How did the ocean get made?" So I said, well, the ocean got made probably the way the earth got made. It's a piece of rock with a lot of water, and it fell off a star, which is now the sun, and there are lots of other pieces of rock, and we call it the solar system. I said, "Do you know how many planets there are in the solar system?" He said, "Well, if you count Pluto, there are 9. This wouldn't stop. He said, "If you count Pluto, there are 9. If you don't, then there are 8. I said, "So where did the solar system come from?" He said, "From the stars? I said, yeah. I said, where did the stars come from? He said, from the galaxies? I said, yes. Where did the galaxies come from? He said, from the universe? I said, that's right, but where did the universe come from? And without batting an eyelid, he said, from another dimension. So here I am in this car in Santa Monica thinking, we are from India, so we think in esoteric terms. I said, this is some past life experience. Einstein was talking about the cosmological constant, and of course, as a grandfather, I want to believe he's a reincarnated Einstein. So I said, how do you know all this? He said, it's on Pokemon. If you don't know what Pokemon is, it's a Japanese video game, and all the kids are playing it. And so, believe it or not, this is the conversation some of our 4-year-olds are having. So I would say that basically summarizes the whole human quest. The two most open questions in science today. The two most open questions in science. Number one, what is the nature of the universe? Okay. And number two, what's the biological basis of consciousness? And we've been to all these conferences, we hear these wonderful theories, and I think it's fair to say that we don't know the answer to either of those questions. Especially now, what's the nature of the universe? Well, if 96% of the universe is dark energy and dark matter, and only 4% is atomic, of which, and I've talked to my cosmologist friends, they say of the 4%, if you exclude the hydrogen and the helium and the invisible interstellar dust, and then the visible universe with all the stars in all the galaxies, and a galaxy can have over 100 billion stars, but the visible universe with all the stars, and now recently some interesting news that there may be many planets that are similar to our Earth, in fact more than we can count, trillions. But all of that is actually 0.01% of the visible universe. So, if anything, science has expanded the unknown and possibly the unknowable. Because if the only 4% or 0.01% of the universe is atomic, then theoretically we shouldn't be able to ever have any empirical evidence of what the rest of it is, because we can only interact with atomic matter. The rest is mathematical calculations, basically, which places science in a very interesting conundrum, because science insists on saying, at least the scientists I've met, other than a few of us fringe scientists who are referred to as pseudoscientists and some of us total flakes, most scientists insist that the universe is mind independent or observer independent. At least that's the mainstream thinking. And yet they also insist on empirical evidence which is mind dependent. And the answer is you can't have it both ways. You can't insist that the universe is mind independent and then ask for empirical evidence which obviously needs a mind. So this is, sometimes we're so stuck in our paradigm that we fail to see the contradiction in just there. Okay. Then the second conundrum is, of course, there is a universe, we are experiencing it right now. But then the biggest second open question, which is the biological basis of consciousness, already is a metaphysical question. The biological basis of consciousness presumes that we have a physicalist biological explanation for consciousness. We keep struggling to find the answer, and we haven't found it, despite all the wonderful theories that are there. That's why we still refer to it as the hard problem. And I think it may be sometimes moot to ask, maybe we are asking the wrong questions. if the answers are so beyond our comprehension, then maybe we shouldn't be asking those questions. Maybe we should be asking other questions. Okay, so to sum it up, by the way, and I'm not going to pretend that I know the answers, but I'm going to give you a point of view that is actually a point of view that's been held by seers and sages and philosophers of consciousness, and I would say scientists of consciousness, if we revise the definition of science, for thousands of years. So if you were to go to the Yoga Vasishtha, for example, and you ask the same question, what is the universe made up of? Since our science cannot give us the answer, the great seer Vasishtha would say it's made out of nothing. And that nothing, by nothing, means no thing. It's not material substance, it's made out of nothing, which is a field of awareness. And that field of awareness, as it interacts with itself, it is experienced as everything. So the answer from the Eastern perspective, very much consistent with where we are, the home of this kind of philosophy, would say that all of reality is consciousness and objects in consciousness. So everything that we can call reality is consciousness, and it's also the objects within consciousness. So that's going to be the bulk of my talk, really. What is nothing and what is everything that is within that nothing? And for that, I owe it to the scientists here to actually, let's just to placate our scientist friends, let's define what science is and how science is done. Science builds and organizes knowledge through explanations that can be tested, falsifiable, leading to predictable results. It's based on a loop of observation, theories or hypotheses, and experiments, and then validation of those theories through repeated observation. And it relies upon objective facts. Now, I'll stop right here, objective facts. You see, because a lot of scientists will tell you, unless you can give me empirical evidence, the facts, then it's not science. But you have to remember that what we call facts, and I was so thrilled to hear your talk this afternoon, Chris, where what we call empirical facts are actually a species-specific mode of observation. They're a description of a species-specific mode of observation. And no more. They are snapshots of something that's not there by the time you've taken a snapshot. And we have it's such an amazing thing how we create scientific facts. So, we see a pattern of behavior in biology. We take a snapshot of it, we call it a molecule, or a gene, for that matter, and then we give it a name, and now it's a fact. When in fact, it was a snapshot. It's like you taking a photo of mine and then saying that's Deepak. The phenomenon, the fundamental truth is much deeper than the observed fact. And furthermore, it represents a very species-specific mode of observation in a human nervous system. Let's assume right now in this room there was a chameleon with eyeballs that swivel on two different axes. There was a mosquito with 100, or not a mosquito, but some insect with 100 eyes. There was a bat that senses its reality through the echo of ultrasound, a snake that experiences what we call reality as infrared radiation, and I could go on and on. There are at least 1 million species with different perceptual apparatuses. I can't really assume that they all see the same thing. So that's an assumption. I don't think it's a reasonable assumption. I don't even know what a dog's bark sounds to a dog, even though I can have a relationship with a dog. But I don't know what the cawing of a crow sounds to a crow with the nervous system that a crow has. So it's obvious that what we call science based on scientific facts is a purely human experience of the universe based on the evolution, whatever the way the human nervous system has evolved. This is a human universe that you and I are talking about. But right now there are many perceptual worlds, okay? And the only thing that they have in common is consciousness. Because it's not that perception is giving rise to consciousness. Consciousness is projecting as species-specific modes of observation. So I have a big problem when people say, what are the facts? Okay. The facts according to some protocol, yes. But is that fundamental truth? And the answer is, it doesn't seem to be. Science also uses empirical measurement to quantify nature, usually in terms of units of mass and energy, velocity and position. But remember, the measurement of an experience is not the experience. And of course, I'm not the first one to say this. We've heard now by the familiar phrase that the map is not the territory, and even neural correlates are maps of experience. All kinds of experience, internal, perceptual, cognitive in many ways, and higher order thought, etc. They're maps of experience. And until recently, science, until I heard this lecture this afternoon and a few others like this, science employs the reductionist method, turning experience into data, and then somehow saying that the data is fundamental truth. Now let's talk about consciousness, because we're here to discuss the science of consciousness. Consciousness has been variously described as subjectivity, awareness, the ability to experience or feel, having a sense of selfhood, and the executive control of the mind, or the use of choice, free will. In Vedanta, and this is again where we get into arguments about, is it an emergent property? Is it the same thing as perception? In Vedanta, which is the pinnacle of Indian philosophical and experiential thought, consciousness is a potential for experience. So it's prior to subject-object split. Right now, you're the objects of my experience, I'm the subject of experience, and you are perceiving me presumably, according to reductionist science, as a result of electrochemical storms and neural networks, and I'm experiencing you the same way. But as far as nature is concerned, all electrochemical storms are her behavior, including these electromagnetic storms in the sky. That's why Indra is the god of manifestation in many ways. Indra is the god of thunder and lightning, which makes perception possible. In Vedanta also, consciousness is absolute. It's being or existence. And these are not esoteric terms. Existence means that which exists. And being also means that which it is, that which is. So it's being or existence prior to that. And in Vedanta, that's the ground of existence. That's the ground of existence, all species-specific perceptions of all sentient beings. And again, in the conferences that I go for, attend, people have a problem with what they call disembodied consciousness. So, I'm conscious, where does my consciousness go when I die? Or this animal has a different experience of perceptual reality. But in Vedanta, since consciousness is the ground, and that's referred to as Brahman, and Brahmand is the universe, then the universe is the body of pure consciousness. And the ground of my existence and the ground of your existence and the ground of that mosquito's existence and the ground of all existence is one ground. If it is a common ground, then it's one ground. And so there's a very famous expression that people here are very familiar with, Atman is Brahman. The ground of the individual is the ground of the universe. And that if there is a personal identity, it's probably a transient, impermanent dream in a universal consciousness, because personal identity is, is just once again a species-specific perceptual experience. But if we can go beyond all that, then we end up with what is called pure consciousness. And this pure consciousness, certain characteristics, I could go on and on, but I'll share with you just 5 characteristics that I think we all agree on in Vedanta, because there are many schools of Vedanta as well. That it has these 5 characteristics that all Vedantists would probably agree with, and maybe some quantum scientists would agree with. Okay? So when say what is the ground of being, the answer is it's not energy, it's your neti, it's not energy, it's not information, it is not space-time, nor is it objects. And it's neither the observer nor the observed. Okay? So if it's not energy, it's not space-time, it's not objects, it's not information, it's not the observer nor the observed, what is it? And the best answer is, and you'd love this, I think some of you, it's a possibility field. It's a superposition of possibilities. Okay? And that superposition of possibilities ultimately collapses as the observer, the process of observation, and that which is observed. So that's one characteristic. Brahman is not a person. Brahman is the ground of existence that manifests as the universe. In fact, the universe is its body. Just like my personal consciousness has this body, Brahman's body is Brahman. It's the universe. Okay? So it's not disembodied at all. If we understand that consciousness has hierarchies of levels of expression, from mineral to plant to animal to self-aware beings to whatever, but it's still the same consciousness that is differentiating into these different expressions of itself. So that was the first characteristic. The second characteristic of pure consciousness is that it's a field, and this is very interesting now, it's a field of correlation. Okay, and for those of you who are quantum physicists, you would say it's a field of non-local correlation, where everything is inseparably correlated with everything else beyond space and time. Okay, it's transcendent. Second characteristic, so it's very consistent with what I'm hearing some of you saying. The third is, it's a field of unpredictability or uncertainty, which should sound familiar to you. Quantum uncertainty. Okay, it's a field of uncertainty in that we cannot predict exactly the space-time events that will come out of this field once it interacts with itself. We don't use the word collapse, we say it interacts with itself. Consciousness interacts with itself to become conscious of. Okay? Something. Whatever it is, but whatever it becomes conscious of is an attribute of itself. So it's a field of uncertainty, it's a field of unpredictability, which leads to the fourth attribute of consciousness in the Vedanta. It's a field of creativity. And the creativity is its expression, and in fact it takes quantum leaps of creativity. Again, please don't mind the use of modern language, quantum leaps, which means when something is created, it has a new context, new meaning, and new expression, and a new story, which is true creativity. It's not artificial intelligence creativity, which uses algorithms, but it's a field of creativity perhaps closer to mathematical creativity if you accept Gödel's theorem, where there are theorems that can't be proved, but they are true. And so like that, consciousness also continually evolves into its expressions through creativity, which are literally leaps of shifts in context, meaning, relationship, and story. Imagination is like that. When you imagine your mother's face and then the Empire State Building, you don't go from your mother's location to the Empire State. You take a quantum leap in consciousness to have that experience. And finally, it's an intention field. It's imbued with intentionality. So it curves back within itself through intention, and it creates these expressions of itself. In the Bhagavad Gita, Prakritim Swam Vashtbhai Vishrajami Puna Puna. Curving back within myself, I create again and again. And for those of you who are familiar with the Sanskrit, and I'm sure, we could learn a lot from you, Subhash, but in the Bhagavad Gita also, I'm the field, and I'm the knower of the field. So, Kshetra is the field, and the knower of the field is Kshetragya. So the field is the field of nothingness, which is pure awareness, which is not your personal property, and nor is it my personal property. But as it interacts with itself, it creates the subject of experience and the object of experience. And prior to collapse, it's neither the observer nor the observed. And post-collapse or post-self-interaction, it is simultaneously the observer and the observed, without which there would be no perceptual experience of the world. And here's the scientific dilemma that I have posed, because, very frequently, I think we get lost in the idea that just because it's science, it must be about fundamental truth. Okay, and so we have these arguments between science and philosophers, and of course the radical new atheists like our friend Dawkins and the others, they go on to say that philosophy is irrelevant now because science is the only way of knowing truth. But here are some of the objections to that. Science, being based on objective measurement, finds itself in a dilemma because consciousness cannot be directly observed and measured. It cannot be observed because in some ways it is also always the observer. It cannot be measured because it is the one that measures. All scientific validation of consciousness is therefore inferential and therefore indirect. It's the same way the evidence for dark matter and dark energy is inferential and indirect. And the only direct experience of consciousness is self-awareness, which means consciousness conscious of itself. Only consciousness can explain consciousness, only consciousness can experience consciousness, and only consciousness can know consciousness. And the only direct experience, therefore, is through spiritual discipline, which is a progressive journey in self-awareness. And that spiritual discipline is the only valid way of understanding and experience higher consciousness. We heard this morning phrases like higher order thought. There's a very good map for higher consciousness, which I'll explore with you in a moment. Here are some of the myths, I think, about science. Since science is based on observation and measurements, it is assumed to be the only reliable way of knowing the truth. This is a metaphysical assumption. No one has ever proven that data is superior to experience. And truth, like all experiences, occurs in consciousness. In fact, science and math occur in consciousness. Science is an activity in consciousness, as is mathematics an activity in consciousness. We make theories in consciousness, we observe in consciousness, we design experiments in consciousness, and we validate them in consciousness. Discovering the facts can never be purely objective as long as science consists of questions and answers perceived in human awareness within the limits of the human nervous system. or the extensions of the human nervous system with scientific experiments or prostheses. Matter, including atoms and molecules, have no physical properties per se, according to what I heard this morning from you, Chris. Matter and molecule are words invented by human beings to explain experiences in consciousness. Solidity, position, color, mass, and so are time and space. So it's not that we're trying to figure out where consciousness fits in the whole scheme of things. It's in consciousness that we experience space-time, energy, information, and matter. Furthermore, we do not experience matter. That's a word. And we are so bamboozled by this material world because we think we are experiencing matter. We experience sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts. Try and tell me if there's anything outside those 4 words that you can experience. Yes, sir?
Can we say that they are tools with which we do experience matter?
Very good. They are tools with which we experience what we call matter. Okay? Huh? We experience consciousness and its contents. And what are the contents of consciousness? Sensation. I just answered this one question. Is there any experience you can have that is outside of those 4 things? Sensation, but that's sense. Images, feelings, and thoughts. You're experiencing me now as an image in your consciousness. Solidity is a sensation in consciousness. Okay? Emotions are experiences in consciousness. They're not material things. They're experiences in consciousness. We put that all together. We say that's matter. And this is my physical body, which is also a gestalt, you might say, of qualia experiences. I think Menas already introduced you to this term. These are qualia experiences in consciousness that are called matter because we are bamboozled into thinking that matter is fundamental truth. Here are some people who did think about these things. You know, I wondered till I come to these conferences, and thanks actually Stuart for being such a gracious host to everybody, because unless you come here, you would think that scientists don't think anymore. I mean, really. I mean, and I'm talking with the best scientists in the world.
I'm not the host here.
Well, Dayal Bagh, and you're a co-host. But you know, if you went to regular conferences, or if you looked or spoke to scientists, you feel very depressed because, you know, the Nobel Prize is going to the discovery of a God particle or this particular technology, and there's no room for thought. There's no room for asking, is what am I observing, is that a fundamental truth or not? Which is, you know, it wasn't the case with the pioneers. Werner Heisenberg, what we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. Okay? John Wheeler, every particle, every field of force, even the space-time continuum deserves its function. It should be derives its function, its meaning, its very existence entirely from apparatus elicited answers to yes or no questions. This is a participatory universe. This coming from a man who coined the words black hole, wormhole, quantum foam, and the phrase it from bit. So everybody is examining the bit without asking what is the it. And I have already said this, observations are made in consciousness, theories are conceived in consciousness. Science cannot explain consciousness, but consciousness can conceive and construct the scientific method. Science is therefore the offspring of consciousness and never escapes it. If there's a reality beyond our awareness, it is unknowable. So all the people who say the reality is observer independent, well, if it is there, it's unknowable. If there's a multiverse, if Max Tegmark if Max Tegmark is right, then his multi-universe is unknowable, and the mathematical equations he does to derive that are in his consciousness. Even mathematical explanations take place in consciousness. So, when I was writing my book on this God book, the Tagore book, and I came across this wonderful piece in the New York Times. Actually, it's from 1930, and this is just before the Second World War. And this was an amazing time because on the one hand, the zeitgeist was Hitler and Nazi Germany brewing. On the other hand, these people were still talking about the questions we talk about today. Okay, so it's a long conversation. I'm not going to read to it. This was recorded by a journalist, and it's on July 14th, 1930 in Potsdam, where Tagore was. Tagore, everyone here knows who Tagore was, but he was Nobel laureate Indian poet who won the Nobel Prize, principally because he got recognized in the West by W.B. Yeats, who actually helped him translate some of his poems. And so Tagore was a great seer. He was referred to as Guru Dev, the great guru. And, when they met, actually, I don't have the entire conversation here, but Einstein probably had read Tagore's poems. So when he met Tagore, he said, he quoted from one of his poems. And Tagore very he said with embarrassment, he would say to Einstein, Herr Einstein, I would quote you, but they're all numbers. So that's how the conversation starts. And he says, you have been busy hunting down with mathematics two ancient entities, time and space, while I have been lecturing in this country on the eternal world of man, the universe of reality. And Einstein responds, do you believe in the divine isolated from the world? And Tagore says, not isolated. The infinite personality of man comprehends the universe. There cannot be anything that cannot be subsumed by the human personality. And this proves that the truth of the universe, or what we call the truth of the universe, is human truth. Now, Einstein disagrees, actually. He says there are two different conceptions about the nature of the universe. The world as a unity dependent on humanity, and the world as reality independent of the human factor. To which Tagore says, when our universe is in harmony with man, the eternal, we know it as truth. We feel it as beauty. Einstein says that's a purely human conception of the universe. To which Tagore responds, the world is a human world. The scientific view of it is also that of the scientific human being. And they talk at length because, as you probably know, that Einstein was a realist, and all his arguments with Niels Bohr and Schrödinger and all the problems that they had were, is the universe mind independent or not? And, Einstein was uncomfortable with the idea of the moon not being there when I'm not looking at it. It turns out it's not there when nobody's looking at it, or now I know an observer, an environment, and the observed as a fundamental unitary experience or unitary truth. So in the end, of course, Einstein, he doesn't concede. He says, I agree with this conception of beauty, but not with regard to truth. And Tagore says, why not? Truth is realized through man. And they go on. This is a long conversation which never got noticed except appeared in the New York Times, as I said. Probably a few people read it, but in the end, Einstein did make a statement that I like to quote. He made many statements that people argue about. He says, I am more religious than you are. Okay? Okay, so what's the deeper truth beyond the material universe? I think the deeper truth is not the existence of the universe, but an awareness of that universe. That's the deeper truth. It goes back to our two questions in the beginning. Okay, there's a universe, and then there's the awareness that there's a universe. If there is no awareness that there's a universe, then it's unknowable anyway. Okay. Science makes models of experience, but a model is not the same thing as the real thing. A mathematical or biological description of reality is not the experience. The universe is human because we know it through experience, and the mystery of experience leads us to find explanations, a secondary activity. The primary activity, in the words of John Wheeler, if I may quote him here, paraphrase him, is participation. It's a participatory universe. We are all co-creators of every aspect of the cosmos. And when we transform our consciousness, that leads to a transformed universe. You know, just thinking about biological evolution, if you want to think about it this way, as consciousness evolved, consciousness being the superposition of all possibilities, okay, the field of creativity, the self-aware field, the field of intentionality, as it evolved through different species, so did the universe. It kept up. Okay? Even now, I think most people are not even aware of black holes or dark matter or dark energy or anything else that we are talking about, but that's an evolution of consciousness using a human brain. And it's a different universe, and we don't need to go to Max Tegmark to explore multiverses. Multiverses exist right here and now. They are species-specific perceptual experiences of the one fundamental consciousness. I don't know, Stuart, you probably know Don Hoffman. He's a cognitive scientist in University of California of Irvine. He's actually appeared in some of your conferences in the past, but I would really think you should get him again, because he's created mathematical models for consciousness expression, and this is one of the models he has. He calls it, which is actually very close to what I and Menas are trying to say. He calls it the multimodal user interface model of consciousness, and he uses mathematics to explain it. But basically he says, let's say you have a desktop computer, and you have all these icons. So we have an icon for Dayal Bagh, we have an icon for Chopra Center, for the world of Stuart Hameroff, etc., Amazon.com. If it's a good computer, all I care about is it works. Okay, I want to press Amazon and I want to have the perceptual experience of what's available at Amazon. If I'm interested in consciousness, I want to press, quantumconsciousness.org. I want to have that experience. I don't care what's happening in the belly of the computer. Okay, so this is an interface for icons. In the belly of the computer are sequential digital codes of zeros and ones. Okay, so that's the common ground for all these different perceptual experiences. And so too, what we call perceptual reality is not fundamental to truth, but only for understanding perceptual experience and survival. And therefore, we get bamboozled by the fact that what we see is what is. Okay? And so too, there's a common ground of consciousness, the belly of the cosmic computer, if you will. Okay? And we all have our qualia vocabulary, so to speak. The way we experience sensations, images, feelings, thoughts. And even the qualia vocabulary can be species specific. It can be culture specific. It can be historically specific. It can be religion specific. That's our qualia vocabulary. So even within a species, we have different qualia gestalts. And these are the icons in our consciousness that we trigger our perceptual experience with, not knowing that there's a fundamental ground of being, the possibility field, that's literally going on and off, to create our different perceptual experiences. It's a nice model, I like it. He says he can mathematically model it, so that makes it even more valid if we trust mathematics to be ultimate truth. And it also says that perceptual experience is not fundamental truth. In India, not a problem. We call it Maya. Right? Now, Maya is variously translated as illusion. If you study the etymology of the word, Margaret, you might be more interested in this. The word Maya, actually, it's the name of a goddess, by the way. And she's the goddess of illusion, but the word Maya itself, and maybe you'll correct me privately if I'm wrong, the word Maya is related to the word myth. Myth, which means the story, and the myth is related to matra, to matrika, to mata, to matter, to meter, to time, to measurement. So Maya is the way we measure infinity, the belly of the cosmic computer. We quantify it as our perceptual experience. We quantify the infinite into the experience of material reality. We say that's the world. It's the perceptual icons we use in consciousness to project our personal realities. Therefore, I would say science is partial truth because it is based on subject-object split, that reality is one. I heard that this morning, the unitary field. The universe is an activity, it's a verb, it's not a noun. There are no nouns. Nouns are conventions of language. There's no noun in the universe. So whether it's a microtubule or it's an oxytocin molecule, all we've done is we've frozen an activity, observed it, and given it a name. Okay, as a perceptual experience in the human nervous system, or rather using the human nervous system. And therefore, everything that we call a thing is a process. Things are artifacts of perception, and the activity of the universe is a single movement in wholeness. The objective existence of the universe, as measured quantitatively, is founded on the subjective experience of that universe, felt and sensed qualitatively. Hence, we live in a human universe. The hard problem exists because of the wrong question. The hard problem exists because of the scientific assumption that consciousness is a property of organized matter. It's animism, really, to first create a perceptual artifact that we call matter and then imbue it with qualities. Based on that assumption, the question is asked, how do electrochemical interactions give us the experience of a three-dimensional space-time reality? And then we say, wow, that's the hard problem. Okay. How does a garlic-sensitive neuron give rise to the experience of taste and smell of a garlic, etc.? And therefore, experience remains a mystery this way. There is no scientifically testable theory of consciousness. There is a solution to the hard problem if we are willing to forsake the assumption that consciousness is a property of organized matter and look at the possibility that matter is a property of consciousness. And that brings us to the resurrection of qualia. You know, I was on a 2-week retreat in silence, but I couldn't actually even write down anything. And I couldn't express my thoughts to myself. But they were brewing. At the end of 2 weeks, I couldn't hold it anymore. I called Menas. I said, we have to move from quantum mechanics to qualia mechanics. Okay. So, here we are. The term originally describing sensory qualities, here's a more deeper understanding. So everything that we call the physical world is properties that we experience as sensations, images, feelings, or thoughts. You use the word acronym. I think we should give attribution to Daniel Siegel, who coined the acronym, sensations, images, feelings, or thoughts. And that includes everything that we experience as substantiality, spaciousness, temporality, color, form, taste, smell, texture, hardness, softness, heat, cold, emotions, feelings, images. In other words, the totality of all experience. These are qualities or subsets or behaviors of consciousness within consciousness. Consciousness and its qualities is all that exists. The sensation of a separate I is also a qualia. You know, you talked about I-ness, but the sensation that a separate I, observer observed, that's a qualia. Because if you go inside me, there's no one there that can say I. Okay, I is non-local. The sensation of the other is a qualia that includes other bodies, other minds, and the world out there. Qualia are innate in the setup of consciousness itself. They are potential forms. Potential, and now this gets a little Platonic here, potential forms in pure consciousness prior to subject-object split. Each individual consciousness, you and I feel separate through a build-up of, now we go back to India, actions. Actions are experiences really, memories and desires. And the reason I asked this question this morning is, you know, we have a word in Indian philosophical Vedanta understanding for memory as a potential memory, sanskara. So sanskara is not a memory as you're experiencing a thought, but is the potential for that, which exists in the field of awareness even prior to subject-object split. And there are many words for this, the akashic field, etc. And every predisposition and personal trait, sanskara, vasana, begins as a potential before it unfolds in physical existence. And again, there is a huge vocabulary to describe this, which I'm not going to go into. And the Atman is pure consciousness. It takes on the attributes of individuality, jiva, by grouping together patterns of qualia. If we want to use the word soul, which I'm hesitant to use the word soul because it's so subject to so many interpretations, but Stuart and I have a paper together called The Quantum Soul. So we do say here that the soul is the essence of each person, pure consciousness, colored by qualia. We experience the soul as unfolding or evolving in time through cycles of birth and death, returning to potential, just like if you leave, at least according to one of the theories of quantum physics, if you leave a particle alone, it's not interacting with other particles or the environment or not being observed, it returns to its potential. Okay, so too, death is a return to potential, and then that potential can recycle as a new qualia program. So birth is the beginning of a qualia program. Death is the termination of the qualia program. The ultimate reality is neither birth or death. It's pre-qualia. And the soul's journey can be visualized as a spiral, constantly returning to re-experiencing new lifetimes, but rising each time to a higher realization of itself, higher realization of its unmanifest being. What about the outer world? All perceived phenomena in the external world, including the perception of the brain, body, and objects out there, are gestalts of pictures in awareness. So the brain as a perceptual object is also an experience in awareness. So awareness is prior to brain. Okay. Actually, if you really go deep into it, it's all the same thing. Matter, energy, information, and possibility is all the same thing. We collectively agree in these pictures as a society with some major disagreements and differences. Consciousness is subject and object, first united as potential, then separated as events in here and out there. Just as quanta were first described as units of mass and energy, qualia are basic qualities of consciousness. Qualia as human experiences are symbolically represented as the data of science. Quanta, the data of qualia. Each person is a qualia matrix, a continuum unfolding from probability clouds. These clouds arise in a transcendent, infinite field of possibilities. Our conditioned self is the qualia matrix. Our unconditioned self is pure possibility. Atman, Brahman, the ground of the universe. So, bringing this back to the science of enlightenment, which fortunately has been alive in India for thousands of years, awareness can be divided into everyday awareness, which is between subject and object, and every step in the direction of enlightenment is a step in self-awareness. So everyday situations are divided into things that fill the mind and its contents, the physical world through the five senses, the inner world of desire, memory, hopes, wishes, fears, relationships with other people. All of these, in one way or another, are sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts. In transcendence, the experience is of awareness itself without the contents of the mind. So this courtesy of our friend Daniel Siegel, who's been very gracious at our conferences, this is the wheel of awareness as visualized in this diagram by Daniel Siegel, who's a psycho-neuroscientist, but he's also comes from a Buddhist background. He says this is the sum total of all the things we can be aware of. So we can be aware of sensory experience as sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell. We can be aware of our body, which means the musculoskeletal system and viscera. We can be aware of mental space, feeling, sensations, thoughts, images, and aware of relationships and connection to the universe. And then, of course, the hub of the wheel is awareness itself, and these are different experiences of awareness being aware of itself. This is the sum total of experience. Now what I'd like to do is, I'm watching the time very carefully, I'd like to be sure that I finish on time, but it will be all an exercise in hopeless abstraction if we don't actually do some experiential meditation on these ideas. So I want to do that as the last part of my talk, and these are the 4 paths: Raj Yoga, which is self-awareness; Bhakti Yoga, the experience of love as the ultimate truth at the heart of creation; Gyan Yoga, the path of knowledge, including quantum physics; and Karma Yoga, the path of action. And these are the 7 states of consciousness, the hierarchy of higher thought, higher ordered thought. So there's deep sleep, but there's awareness in deep sleep, because if I come and shout at you and you say, hey, your house is burning, you'll get up and run. Okay, then there's the dream state. Now there's a subject-object split within consciousness, and there's also a story within consciousness. There's a qualia experience. Waking state. So you say, last night I had a dream. It was just a dream, it was artificial. And the Vedantists will say, well, you're having a dream right now. You call it waking state because you're in it. Last night you were in the dream. You weren't aware that you were dreaming. Okay, it's only after you woke up from the dream that you realized that you were dreaming. You need to wake up from this dream that you call waking. And if you think about this a little bit, our ordinary thoughts, everyday existence, are always about the past or the future. Would you agree? Every interpretation is about the past. Every desire or imaginary experience is about the future. And if we spend most of our life in the past and the future, we are spending most of our life in a dream reality. Okay, but we're so in it that we call it waking real reality. Okay, so then this is the 4th state. It's pure transcendent consciousness, which is for the first time being aware of a non-local observing self. So right now, as you're listening to me, I would ask you to just turn the quality of your awareness in a way that you are aware of who's listening. So instead of being aware of me, just be aware of who's listening. That is the non-local observer. Non-local because there's no location for it. You can't locate it in your brain or anywhere else. Okay? We share that non-local observer. Because that events in the non-local observer. Now, can we map correlates for this in the brain? Sure can, because there's no mental event or no event that should not theoretically have a brain correlate. So we can map it, and that's great, but that doesn't mean the map is the territory. Okay? Cosmic consciousness. So this is in Sanskrit, by the way, this is called Turiya. Turiya means beyond. Cosmic consciousness is called Turiya Tattva in Sanskrit. It says that the non-local observer is fully awake in waking, dreaming, and sleeping. Okay, so your body is fast asleep, but the observer of the body is aware of the body in sleep. The observer of the mind is also aware of the body dreaming, or the mind dreaming. When the non-local observer is fully awake in waking, dreaming, and sleeping, which means it's local and non-local at the same time. In Christian theology, by the way, there's a favorite expression, and I tried to find out who said it first, because it's certainly not in the New Testament, but Christians quote it all the time: to be in the world and not of it. It's a very nice phrase. So it basically means to be local and non-local at the same time. Or the lamp at the door, or the lamp at the bushel. Jesus speaks of it. But that's cosmic consciousness, is to experience non-locality, the non-local observer in the midst of all observations and all states of consciousness, waking, dreaming, sleeping. Divine consciousness, or if you don't like the word divine, then you could say refined cosmic consciousness, is when you become aware of the non-local observer in the objects of your observation. So there's a beautiful story actually of the Buddha, and he's just come out of silence in the deer park at Banaras, and he's holding a flower in his hand, presumably a rose or some flower, or this plant you would say. Everybody looks at the plant, and at one point Ananda, his favorite disciple, smiles, and Ananda, Buddha smiles back, and that's the end of the sermon. And so everybody goes to Ananda and says, we saw a flower. It seems you saw something else. And the Buddha says, ask Ananda what he really saw. So Ananda says, I saw the flower, but I also saw rainbows and sunshine and earth and water and wind and air. I saw the infinite void. I saw the galaxies, and I saw all that as a perceptual experience that we're calling a flower. And then I felt the non-local observer, I'm paraphrasing of course, in the flower. Okay? So it's a very profound experience that is talked about at length, called God consciousness, or Dev Darshan, or divine consciousness, or refined cosmic consciousness, where the non-local observer is experienced both in the subject and the object, and there's a kind of a communion between the two. And finally, unity consciousness, which is called the state of enlightenment, where the observer and the observed and all processes of observation, they actually become one unified experience, where you experience yourself as the cosmic observer observing the evolving universe. Brahman observing, and there's a merging of personal identity into a totally cosmic identity. What are the subjective correlates of this? Well, we know the subjective correlates of deep sleep is little awareness, dreaming a little bit more awareness, waking more awareness. So it's a progressive journey in self-awareness. And as we wake up to transcendent consciousness, then the qualities of pure consciousness, more possibility, more creativity, more intuition, more insight, more imagination, more synchronicity because it's a field of non-local correlation, and finally actualizing intent from the unmanifest to the manifest, which is the siddhis and directing intention for manifestation. So that starts to wake up as a subjective experience. Now, in the few years that I was involved with research, we would do brain waves at then and see what was happening. And so we did see that the brain waves of people who are having subjective experiences tended to move in the direction of brain waves, even in waking state, that were the same as people in meditation. Because meditation is a process where observer, process of observation and observed resolve into a single unity. And then the objective correlates of cosmic consciousness, divine consciousness, unity consciousness are literally what are called the siddhis, which are basically the potential or realizing the potential of the unmanifest becoming the manifest, which is happening all the time. And of course, in India we have a vocabulary, Sthul Sharir, which is the physical domain, Sukshma Sharir, which is the subtle domain, and causal, which is the non-local, basically. And the non-local also has several levels, so it can get pretty complex. Okay, so here are the different states of consciousness, dominated by different subjective experiences. I'm not talking objective, although I do believe that you should be able to create objective correlates. Okay, so deep sleep, no perception. Dreaming, perception of illusory images. Waking, perception dominated by objects out there, which are actually qualities in here, and mental activity in here. Transcendent, aware of the self with no objects or mental activity. Cosmic consciousness, awareness of the self maintained along with inner and outer worlds. Divine reality dominated by light and bliss. Closer to the light. Because the light, by the way, you know, we have this again very interesting thing. What we call light, or photons, this part of our convention, we equate that with brightness. But photons are not bright. They're colorless, massless particles or waves, whatever you call them. What gives them brightness is the light of consciousness. And the Sanskrit word for that is prakash or paramakash or whatever. It's the light of awareness that gives color, substantiality, brightness, and it has internal correlates too. So we use the same words for our emotion. It's a dark mood, it's a bright day, it's a bright joyful experience. We are light-hearted, we are heavy, etc. They are qualities of consciousness that are imbued into our experience of the world. Okay, and then finally unity consciousness, no subject-object split. I am that, you are that, all this is that, Tattvamasi. Aham Brahmasmi, Tattvamasi, the Mahavakyas. Okay, so here are the big Mahavakyas. Some of them, of course, I'm sure my audience here will appreciate. Aham Brahmasmi means, who are you? I'm the universe. I'm the total activity of the universe expressing itself as a space-time or a continuum of space-time events with a qualia program that begins and terminates. But my real identity is, who are you? You're the same. Satchitananda, that is the ground of being, which you spoke of, Benas. Sankalp, subtle intention, which is the Shiva Shakti, really the harmony of the masculine and the feminine elements of the universe, and then this is a word that is very beautiful, Ritam Bhara Pragya. Ritam is the Sanskrit word which is related to the English word rhythm, and Ritam is the order of the universe, which is a synchronicity. You know, we use the word universe, one song. So it's a symphony, and our little microcosm, the little fractal of the universe, is dancing to that symphony, even though we can't name the tune. But our biological rhythms, circadian, lunar, and all the rituals, as we were discussing, were rituals to harmonize the rhythms of the microcosm with the rhythms of the macrocosm. So ritam bhara pragya means the mind that is full, bhara, full, or filled with the cosmic harmony. And when you experience cosmic harmony, you experience synchronicity, which Wolfgang Pauli and what's his name, the Swiss psychologist, Carl Jung, they explored a little bit of that, and I think they got the idea from here, because Carl Jung was a big student of Vedanta. Okay, I'm going to stop here. These are all qualia experiences, by the way, okay, in our consciousness. I'm going to show you a very quick series of slides on the neural correlates. And remember, neural correlates, the most we know right now is through functional MRIs, which are basically blood flow. You know, that's all we know. But I'm going to show you what little we know. I love these because, you know, I use these as emoticons now. You know, you have these animated emoticons. So I want to give somebody a dopamine or oxytocin hit in South Africa. I send them, depending on their taste, I send them this emoticon or this or this or this, whatever. And there you are. The person's getting a dopamine hit. Or if I want to annoy them, then I send them something really crazy. And you can see that their blood pressure rises. Now that we have social networks, we can see that our mind is both embodied and relational through a neural network that we're calling Twitter or Facebook or whatever you want to call it, to show you where we can go. And if we understand consciousness, we understand the process of enlightenment, then probably there's a way to measure some of this. And for those of us, you know, who like to measure, it's a kick. Okay? So this is a slide that I prepared. Everyone's familiar with this, the brain here, and where what correlates with what. And here is the prefrontal cortex that you spoke about at length. So what I'm going to say is not necessarily standard or what you may not agree with, but by and large people say that you can influence the behavior of your neurons and your synapses, and that actually means that you can influence genetic activity. So right now, as I'm speaking to you, and you're absorbing this information, you're thinking about it, you have to have neural representations, you have to activate certain genes. There's no getting around it. You have to, you know, use messenger RNA and the whole replication process, and it's happening right now, instantly. So our neurons are sculpted by experiences, they are created by our genes, but they are actually an expression of, you might say, our consciousness, and through certain practices we can activate the prefrontal cortex. Now this has been done again with functional MRIs in Buddhist monks, thanks to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who's offered his subjects. We are currently doing a study at our Chopra Center where we are measuring the enzyme at the end of that influences telomerase with Elizabeth Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize, and within 4 months of meditation and certain other things, you know, we make sure that they're sleeping well. We're not isolating any one factor. We're sleeping well, exercising, going through a retreat experience. But within 3 months, 30%, 4 months, 30% elevation in telomerase. And now we're looking at telomeres length. Now this is revolutionary, because how can a mental activity influence an enzyme that influences the length of telomeres and actually influences, in a way, your biological clock? So just to be safe, we're replicating it, but the first study was published in the Academy of Sciences in 2009. Reflection and, of course, motor cortex intentionality supposed to be orchestrated. Very interesting, this part of the brain that we call the insula, because In yogic literature, there's something called pratyahara. Everybody here knows what pratyahara is, right? Going inside, withdrawing from the senses. But pratyahara, taken to its deepest level, is the awareness of the viscera and the heart and the ability to actually, through intention, regulate what's happening. Right now, if I had the time, I would share with you, but I'm wearing all kinds of biosensors. I'm wired up right now, okay? And these biosensors measure everything from heart rate to heart rate variability, which is the dance between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, sweat activity, skin temperature, basal metabolic rate, calorie expenditure, on and on. And this technology is only going to get better. So if I take the strap off, you'll see 5 or 6 biosensors, and I'm hoping that these will be able to measure hormone levels in the future. So cortisol, peptides, which is indirectly an indication of genetic activity. So we can influence the insula. I'll take you through a little exercise to show you how to activate the insula, which is what's happening inside your body. This is buried, and this understanding the insula may be key to understanding addictive behavior. Reptilian brain, which is the brain that basically is taking care of everything right now, your blood pressure, your heart rate, etc. But in our model, an expression of non-local awareness, orchestrating or multitasking everything all at the same time. You know, because your blood pressure, your heart rate, your hormones, it's a unified activity. It's not even a complex activity. It's a unified activity where you, the environment, your relationships, and the cosmos are a single movement. So reptilian brain, limbic brain, which is in mammals, but which also basically limbic brain, because the limbic brain is connected to hypothalamus and pituitary, it influences, it regulates homeostasis, is what we're finding out through emotions. So my emotions are limbically connected to yours, because if you're upset, it's likely that I'll be upset if I interact with you, because our limbic brains monitor each other's brains, and they in turn then monitor the pituitary hypothalamic axis that influences self-regulation of homeostasis. So that's why emotions are so connected to self-repair mechanisms. If you have inflammatory emotions, anger, hostility, resentment, guilt, shame, depression, you'll have inflammation in the body. Okay, and that's a limbic phenomenon. And then finally the cortex, where I'm not saying the cortex is responsible for these things. I'm saying the cortex is the representation for conscious intent, consciousness of the body, monitoring and regulating or overriding emotions, and introspection, intuition, insight, imagination, creativity, and everything else that makes us human. I will now, again, these are the neural correlates. This is not the origin of these. This is the representation in our cosmology. Imagination, creativity, all of that. Okay, we can forget about all this for now. It's very interesting to follow the evolution of this kind of thought, though, in the literature, and also how these higher order thinking is actually on the way to self-awareness. Love, compassion, empathy, but ultimately spiritual exaltation, peak experiences, the thrill of scientific discovery. These are higher ordered thinking that consciousness is evolving into. And in all probability, it's cortex, limbic brain working together. Because people have intense emotional experiences when they make scientific discoveries, and then they of course have emotional attachment to their scientific theories. Intuition, creativity, vision, sense of the sacred are what might be called the beginning of metabiological evolution, and evolution of consciousness, and all these things, and I'm using the word entanglement loosely according to physicists, but I do believe that our moods, our brain networks, hormone levels, heart rate, immune function, biological rhythms, blood pressure, sleep-wake cycles, dreams, digestive processes, and many, many other functions. We tend to isolate them, but they're all entangled. They're all interdependently co-arise depending on our state of consciousness. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through, just the wheel of awareness in the last. But here's what, there are 5 things you can do to expand your awareness and actually access higher states of consciousness. Maybe 6. And they come under the following categories. The first is fall under, let me name them first so it's clear. The first is self-awareness. Okay, so self-awareness is awareness of the wheel of awareness, all the things that we can. The hub of the wheel is all the things we can be aware of. Not the hub, the rim of the wheel is all the things we can be aware of. The hub of the wheel is awareness. Okay? So I'm going to take you through an exercise that involves self-awareness. Then that'll come second. Before that, I'm going to take you through an exercise called self-reflection. Okay? That's a higher order thought. Okay? So self-reflection, which obviously would activate perhaps the prefrontal cortex. Irrelevant what it does not, but self-reflection, which is part of the tradition in India. Sri Ramana Maharishi spent his entire lifetime with 2 questions that I'm going to take you through, okay, and reflection on that. So self-reflection, self-awareness, which includes the wheel of awareness, transcendence. Transcendence is the third technique, which means going beyond the subject-object split. The fourth is conscious choice making, which overrides your reactive brain, which is mindfulness really, before you respond to anything. So we're not going to do that right now. Just a reminder that there is a way to override your reptilian brain and even your emotional brain if you stop, observe, and choose. Okay, should be a habit. And that's the fourth. The fifth is knowing the difference between the perceptual and the fundamental. Or perceptual is what I'm seeing, and the fundamental is the consciousness through which it is arising, which is the Buddha's experience. To see the universe in a grain of sand, or hold eternity in the palm of your hand. That's the fifth. And the sixth is witnessing awareness in sleep and dreams. So those are the 6 things. It's something we would do in a retreat for 3 months, but we'll do it now in 20 minutes. Okay? So please close your... and I'm going to show you introception too, which is how to go inside and influence what's happening in your body, pratyahara. But it's all part of this, okay? So please put your feet on the ground. If you have your legs crossed, please do not cross them. Have them uncrossed. Sit relatively erect. And keep your hands open if you could, and the palms of your hands open in your lap. And close your eyes. Remember, we're going to take a journey into 6 different areas in a very short time. So I apologize even before I start, but you'll have something to explore later, okay? So for a minute or two, just observe your breath. And let your mind settle into your breath. Just have this idea that my mind is settling into my breath. And now bring your awareness into your heart and mentally ask yourself the following question: who am I? And allow any sensations, images, feelings, or thoughts to spontaneously emerge. No forced thinking, just the question: who am I? Any sensations, images, feelings, or thoughts to spontaneously arise. Stay with that. And now change the question to, when I ask the question, who am I? Who is asking the question? Who asks the question, who am I? Again, just settle into your awareness and allow any sensations, images, feelings, or thoughts, insights to emerge. You're doing an experiment in consciousness in the field of possibilities, collapsing wave functions right now. Who's asking the question, who am I? Okay, so we'll move from self-reflection to self-awareness. And we'll start with the first quadrant of the wheel of awareness. So imagine that awareness itself is the hub of the wheel, and the rim of the wheel is the four quadrants. And the first quadrant of the wheel is the five senses. And so you can think of a clock, a minute clock, and the clock moves slowly through the four quadrants. The first quadrant is the five senses. So just become aware of any sensation of sound right now. Now become aware of the sensation of touch. Feel your skin touching your clothes, perhaps your buttock touching the chair, your feet in your shoes, whatever touch sensation you can feel, just become aware. There's no analysis, just an awareness. And now, without opening your eyes, let's go through some visual qualia experiences. So imagine that you're looking at a sunset on the ocean. Imagine that you're looking at the snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas. Evoke the visual experience of your house, wherever that is, in your home. The face of your mother. Any color that you want to. Any landscape that you want to. So again, through intention, you're collapsing possibilities into qualia within consciousness, visual qualia. Let's move. Just through intention, evoke the taste of strawberries, coffee, chocolate ice cream, Indian thali, vegetarian thali, anything you want to taste. Again, through intention, you're collapsing possibility waves into qualia experiences. In this case, taste. And finally, let's move to smell. See if you can evoke the smell of onions. Or curry powder, curry. The smell of a pine forest. So again, just intention, collapsing of possibility waves into these qualia experiences. We went through sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell. Okay, now let's move to the second quadrant, awareness of the body. So just become aware of first just your musculoskeletal system. So become aware of your spine, your shoulders, your neck, your head, your joints, your feet, your toes, just the muscles and the skeleton. All at once, or you can move it around, bringing awareness. Let that go. Become aware of the region of your abdomen. And now become aware of the interior of the abdomen, the viscera. Become aware of your chest. Little movement as you're breathing in and out. And now become aware of your heart and have the intention that you can feel your heartbeat. have the intention that you can feel your heartbeat. We're going into what do we call interoception. So feel your heartbeat, and you should be able to feel it either as a sound or a sensation. Now move your awareness into your fingertips and see if you can feel your heartbeat. Just with a little intention, feel your heartbeat and throbbing of your heart in your fingertips. And you should be able to feel the throbbing of your heartbeat in your fingertips, or at least some warmth or some sensation, some kind of qualia experience. It's a particular frequency of the pulse of life, but that pulse is there in the entire universe. In different frequencies, of course. Okay, so we moved from the first quadrant into the second quadrant, which was body. Now let's move to the third quadrant, which is mental space. In fact, by now you should have the insight that everything you've experienced is already in mental space. It's all qualia experience. But here's mental space as insight or revelation. In the scriptures of India, it's called Shruti and Smriti. Okay, Shruti is that which is heard, and Smriti is that which is remembered in mental space. And so again we go back to a little, we started with who am I, who asked the question, but in that mental space, ask any question. You want to go all the way? What is the nature of reality? What is the nature of the cosmos? And just wait for revelation as it's revealed to you from the possibility field. Finally, let's move to the fourth quadrant. We could spend weeks on each quadrant, on each segment of each quadrant, but let's move to the fourth quadrant, the quadrant of relationship. So become aware of your immediate relationships, your family. Just awareness. Close friends. Professional colleagues. The place where you work. The city in which you live. The state, if it's applicable. The country. Just bring it into your awareness. The country, its geography, its weather, its people, its cultures, its tastes, its the entire ecosystem of which you are an expression. And now expand that awareness to the awareness of our planet. A little speck of dust in a galaxy spinning on its own axis, revolving around the sun. become aware of the solar system, expand that to the Milky Way galaxy, if you want, beyond Andromeda, all the other galaxies, all the way to the cosmic horizon, 47 billion light years from where we are. This is the web of relationship that is me, or you. Let it all go. And now repeat after me just one sound. Aham. Say it again. Say it again. Okay, now with your eyes closed, without moving your... Aham, by the way, means I am, or I exist. And just keep repeating that mentally without moving your lips or your tongue. And please don't open your eyes till I ask you to. Okay, we started with the basic idea, what's the nature of the universe and what's awareness of the universe, are the two linked. And according to the Vedanta, the key to those, finding the solution to those, is self-awareness. Because the self of the individual is the self of the universe. Atman is Brahman, so self-awareness. We started with something very simple, reflection. Okay, reflection is just asking. It's an experiment you're setting up in consciousness. You ask a question, you let it go, and see what comes up. And theoretically, you're collapsing possibility waves into one particular insight. And when you know the truth, it will be revealed to you as inspiration or insight, or what spiritual traditions call revelation. So it's reflection. Sri Ramana Maharishi spent his entire life with those two questions. For most of his life he was silent, but then for a few years, that's it. Who am I? Who's asking the question? The second was going through the wheel of awareness. We went through the 4 quadrants, but as you go through the 4 quadrants, you still realize that everything that you experience, whether it's sound, touch, sight, taste, smell, experience of your body, experience of mental space, experience of relationship, is basically all qualia in consciousness. There's nothing outside of that. Okay? The experience of sound is a qualia. There's no noise in your brain when you have the experience of a sound. Okay? When you experience a sunset, there's no picture of a sunset in your brain. Okay, but you experience a sunset. So you're always experiencing qualia. We quantify them, measure them, and then we say that's what it is. You do not experience electrochemical storms. Okay? You experience qualia. So we went through the whole wheel of awareness, we went through mental space, and then the third part was I asked you to repeat what is a mantra. Mantra, the difference between a mantra and a regular thought is that a regular thought that we have is a result of what we call karma, misunderstood word, but karma simply means past experiences, memory, sanskaras, and then desires, the wheel of manifestation. We have an experience, and you said it, representation of experience, experience and knowledge, right? That's what karma is, basically. Karma is the memory, the knowledge, and the representation of it, which evolves into other experiences of karma. So every thought that we have is that, okay? It's a sanskara, and it's unique to you and me, or to our culture, or to our time, or our place in history, or the movies we've seen and the books we've read. Okay, so that is a thought that is coming out of karma. It has meaning, context, etc. But aham has no such thing. It's just a simple statement. I am. It's unique to all of us. So it's a bij mantra in a way is, and there are many of these, but we just chose that, it's kind of free of karma. So now what you have is in your consciousness, you have these two kinds of thoughts. Thoughts that are memories, desires, meaning, and then this little thing that's just vaguely kind of dancing around these other thoughts, you know. Reminds me of a beautiful poem of Rumi. It says, who am I in the middle of all this thought traffic? Okay, so you're there in the middle of all this thought traffic, and then at some point, the mantra, I am, if you're lucky, and we didn't do it long enough, but if you're lucky and not trying, the mantra and the thoughts, they cancel each other out. And so you have an experience which is no mantra, no thought. If there's no mantra, no thought, there's no subject-object split. Because the subject-object split is the thought. Okay, so that's transcendence. Now, it happens. If you do it, it'll happen. And you will then have the personal aha experience. There is a consciousness that is beyond subject and object. Okay? It's pure possibilities, and it's me. Everything is the conditioned mind beyond that. Okay, now, so we went through those three experiences. Now, the only other things I would say to you to add to this is, if you do this every day, you're bound to explore these different dimensions. And not only that, if you go to sleep at night, and there's a lot of literature these days of lucid dreaming, but just with the intention that you're going to watch your dreams, and you're going to be the observer of your sleep, and when you wake up, you have the same thing. You recapitulate that. By and by, you become the ever-present witnessing awareness of your waking, dreaming, and sleeping state. So no matter what you are, the ever-present non-local awareness doesn't leave you. Okay, that's then Turiya, here, fourth. And then if you stay with that process, the ever-present witnessing awareness becomes a cognitive experience, if not a perceptual experience, in the objects of your perception. And finally, if you go all the way, you realize there's only one witnessing awareness in the whole universe, with all its observers, all its modes of observations, and all its objects of observation, is the one awareness with these frequency domains of perception. The perceptual not being the fundamental. And so, you know, there is more to say about this, but the fact that everything you see is actually a confluence of relationships of the total universe at this particular space-time moment. And the space-time moments are snapshots of perception, but between the snapshots is a discontinuity, which is pure consciousness, and that's our true identity. And even birth and death are parentheses or punctuation points in that. Now, it would all be theoretical if people actually didn't have the experience that as they move through these states of consciousness, their awareness becomes more contextual, more relational, more holistic, with the absence of a win-lose orientation, because the only obsession becomes, I want to figure it out. What the heck is going on? You know, as what's his name Sir John Eddington said, something unknown is doing we don't know what. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
We can have a few questions before we close. Yeah, there.
Yes, thank you for a lovely talk and also the meditation session. Now, I think I work in Western philosophy, and of course you came to this from the Eastern and the Vedic philosophy, but actually in many of the things you say, there are very strong resonances with Western thinkers like Berkeley and Hume, and that whole sort of line of thought, which is very interesting. But there again, as in philosophy, there are many different viewpoints, and you would, as you're aware, you would find many philosophers that would have a different way of thinking, let's say, about perception. And I actually just I finished a few days. I was teaching epistemology course to undergraduates, and I had to study it myself because that's not usually my field. And I was amazed to find that among current epistemologists, the theoreticians of knowledge, when it comes to perception, they're actually going back to naive realism when it comes to everyday perception. Okay, then when it comes to hallucinations and dreams, they don't know what to say about those. But they are saying perception is something we use to observe the world. I'm looking at you there. I'm not looking at my own quality. I'm looking at you. Perception is a tool. And this is amazing. I think there's a very nice article about this in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. I think it's called Epistemological Theories of Perceptions. I think you would find that fun to read, and maybe we'll
I would love to read that. But if say perception is a species-specific experience, then there are so many versions of me. Which one is the real one?
Right. Well, but maybe the different. Logically, it might be logically possible that even if we have different systems, they could still, in some sense, be observing the same.
Can we have the next question, please? There.
Again, thank you, Deepak. I just have a quick question. I tried to convince the audience at the conclusion of a talk I gave a couple days ago that there is only one system.
That's right.
Do you agree or comment on that?
Oh, we heard that this morning. There's only one system. Did we not hear it? And all boundaries are conceptual, right? You want to say that again, perhaps?
Any other question?
Yes, sir. There's only one system.
Okay, I also have a comment and two very short questions. The first one is, from what you said, present-day epistemology, I think you can see in all kinds of disciplines that the discourse of the natural sciences has won. I mean, we always say, of course, the way we represent the world in disciplines, in discourses, shapes our experience of it. And I think there's no question about it that whatever is done in the West. I recently read a whole book about why religion. And this whole book was written basically from a scientific epistemology, only arguing in terms of cause and effect. People are religious because it supports economic communities and stuff like that. So all these thinkings is already happening in the frame of a dominant discourse dominated by natural sciences. So I think that we have to keep this in mind.
But Stuart is gracious enough to bring people from all these different perspectives so we can actually explore this.
Yes. My questions are two. The one is, I'm interested in the etymology of what in English is consciousness in Sanskrit. And the second one is, when you talk about the manifestations of consciousness, why is there a hierarchy? Why is it not just difference? Because postmodern people would just say, philosophers would just say, it's just difference. It's not a hierarchy. A hierarchy is already sort of, you would say, a sort of human-specific.
Stages of awareness. Stages of awareness, but there is a sequential expansion of awareness, and your universe is only as big as your awareness is. So I think there is a kind of a hierarchical development. But what was the first question? The etymology. It's chit. Consciousness, pure consciousness is chit. Chit means awareness, really. And as soon as it interacts with itself, then it becomes conscious of something. But what it becomes conscious of is a differentiated expression of itself, because there's nothing outside itself.